Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on what are contractors doing to optimize project profitability in 2025. I'm Andrew Curtin, CEO and founder of Construction Wave. We'll go straight around the room. James, introduce yourself. Good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm James Garner. I'm actually come from the consultants side, so I work for Gleeds. I'm a senior director at Gleeds. Background as a QS, mainly working in the education sector, but these days have been involved with all things digital within Gleeds, particularly looking at how we can utilize AI. I also run a podcast and a newsletter called Project Flux about how we utilize AI in the industry.
Thanks, James. Phil, yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Philip Clifford Brown. I'm Managing Director of West Analytics. We're a software company. We build solutions for workforce management and also AI in the construction industry.
Thanks. And Gabriel, Coreloops, thanks a lot. You guys are sponsoring this podcast. Everyone just making aware. Thanks, Gabriel, for support. You came to us with this idea, and we want to put on a good show, and we put the agenda together. And yeah, give everyone an introduction on yourself and Coreloops.
Hi everyone. My name is Gabriel. I'm the CEO and founder of Coreloops, and we're a modern construction accounting solution. And we work mainly with small to mid-sized construction businesses to help them track their costs and profitability on projects.
Thanks, Gabriel. Guys, you're going to see me kind of looking to the left small because I have a packed agenda for today, but we will get it done the hour because I know everyone needs to get back to work. But should be make for a good discussion. So we kind of get straight to it. James, I'm going to start with yourself, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
What are some of the issues companies are facing around project profitability?
Well, I think it's an ongoing problem in our industry. It's no secret that we operate on extremely low profit margins, and that's across the industry, but probably more so within contracting than anything else. So that means that there's not a lot of room for innovation. So a lot of the issues that we've had in terms of payments and retentions and unfavorable credit terms, etc., they've been around for a very, very long time. And there's always a tendency to want to invest in technology to try and overcome some of these issues because there are very, very good kind of solutions on the market. But I think the big encouragement recently has been, whilst up until now there's always been quite an investment and quite an expense to implement one of those solutions, the cost of entry to these solutions have come right down now. So I think there's a different kind of mindset and a different era that we're entering now where we can make use of some of this fantastic technology that's been available in other industries for a long, long time, but the construction can now start taking advantage of that technology.
Yeah, and Phil, if we just we're going to dig a bit and have a technology segment in a while, but I remember we spoke briefly, or we spoke in depth really before the webinar last week, and we just talked about some of the broader issues as well. We obviously adopting technologies is an issue, but what are some of the broader things we see in the industry? Retention, obviously, labor costs. You know, from your side, you have a main contractor experience, and that's your background, Phil, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the issues that we're talking about today, technology may or may not be the answer, but the fundamental process problems need to be addressed first. There's a huge lack of standardization, inconsistency in the way processes run, and to leverage technology successfully, and as you say, we're going to talk about some of the detail of that later on. To leverage technology, you do need some consistency. So if I was going to summarize that, it would be the lack of standardization of process, and also maybe the fact that it's a project driven business. It seems to me that when projects are started and executed with the best one in the world, best ideas for improvements, some of those improvements actually just go in the bin at the end of the project and don't get carried over to the next iterations.
Yeah. I remember we said, Phil, and I think we all said it on the run up to this webinar, but we've so many different things in the pots. Like if you're just say that we've a subcontractor on this call, you know, the first thing they'll say is like retentions, you know, we're not profitable because we're not, you know, because of this policy. Then it's labor costs and stuff. So there's just so much into the mix. You know, we could spend a day on this webinar just going through everything. But from your experience, Phil, what do you think, just some of the broader ones, just say from your main contracting experience, what were some of the issues you saw?
Yeah, so, well, the process of retentions, applications and certificates is probably the biggest one, you know, followed by the usual bun fights you get at the end of final accounting of projects.
And Gabriel, with Coreloops, you're obviously working with, you know, a lot of subcontractors and stuff. What is the stuff you're seeing in the market?
Well, I think if you just look at the nature of construction, most of these subcontractors, contractors are working with a lot of companies that are external to their business. A lot of parties are external to their business. So they're receiving a lot of information in different formats, having to send it back out in different formats. And you know, when they don't have the resource to do that internally, sometimes that work doesn't get done. So what we actually see, which is more common, is, you know, rather than them actually, you know, thinking about optimizing, some of them are not even tracking profitability in the first place, and therefore don't have that visibility. And we know that in the long run, that leads to obviously cash flow issues, and obviously companies going out of business and affecting the main contractors and the clients that they eventually work for. So I think one big problem is just because of the sheer amount of unstructured data that they're receiving and having to put out on a day-to-day basis. It's so hard to stay on top of it and really have a clear picture of how much you're actually making on each project.
Yeah, and I'm just going to leave this open to the floor. That's just a clear lack of resource. If you have, you know, civil engineering company maybe doing 20-25 million pounds a year, they just don't have time to actually sometimes sit down. They're just like, I'm operating on a few percent. I have people problems left, right, and center. How do I get around to this? I'm just leaving this open for discussion, and we can openly discuss this. Does anyone want to jump in first here? Yeah,
sure. Okay, Andrew. So I think there is a little bit of a, I don't know, I'll call it a power imbalance for want of a better phrase. But main contractors, you'll have their own ways of working. They may have their own procurement portals and billing portals that they require their suppliers to use. And you know, if you are working in a much smaller business, then you've got no option but to comply with the admin procedures that the main contractor specifies if you want the work. And if you've got a small firm doing work for a number of main contractors, it is a big overhead. It's a big admin overhead to try and chase it down and keep a hold of it all.
Yeah. It's part of the fragmented nature of the industry, you know, the fact that we've got so many. If you look at a kind of standard, say, £25 million project, the amount of parties involved, all the way from the client down to the consultants, to the main contractor, to the subcontractors, to the suppliers, it's, you know, hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people. And as soon as you start introducing different systems and different procedures, you're kind of doubling, tripling, sometimes quadrupling that workload. So unfortunately for the subcontractors and the suppliers at that kind of the bottom of that chain, they're the ones who can be hardest hit by that, because all of a sudden they've got to do every single one of those systems.
Yeah, James, on the client side, what responsibility is there from a client side, you know, for the supply chain? That's always something that interested me.
Yeah, I mean, you know, most clients do. No clients go out intentionally to make it difficult, but it's the nature of the fragmentation of the industry. It's the same thing that we have this. Sometimes it's ridiculous to think of it. You get a bunch of people together who've never met each other before. You spend 2, 3, 4 years together. You do something incredible. You know, what we actually produce in the industry is incredible, with the buildings and the infrastructure that we produce. And then we just all go our separate ways, and all that knowledge is gone, and we start again. So that's what clients are faced with, because that's just the way we do things, and that's the way we've done things for a long time. I think, you know, when I entered the industry, there was a lot of talk about partnering, and it never has really taken off. But to me, that's the obvious thing we should be doing, is building relationships where we can do a project, and then all that learning we've got and all the lessons learned and all the pain that we've gone through, because we do go through pain to get these things built, they can be seized upon, and then we can do it better and better. You know, much like they do it in the manufacturing industry or the car building industry. They wouldn't think of saying, right, we've built that car, let's just scrap all that. Let's, for the next one, we'll start from scratch again. It'll be a mental proposition. Yet we do that every single time in the construction industry.
It's an interesting analogy, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen any, James, have you seen any good examples of clients trying to retain knowledge and pass that on to future projects?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of good frameworks out there. So I mean, it's there's some better than others, but where you've got these kind of framework agreements, then you do start seeing that come into play. But unfortunately, what tends to happen is they're written with the best will in the world, but it always comes down to price. And then people play games with the pricing. So even though it's set up to be collaborative, all it takes is one bad person to misuse it, if you like, or start playing games with the pricing mechanisms or what have you. Then then everyone has to play that game. You go down to the lowest common denominator. So, like I say, in my experience, most clients are in this for the right reasons, and most consultants are in it for the right reasons. Everyone's trying to create a framework that works, but it takes one sort of bad play or one person to not play the intentions properly that can ruin it for everyone else.
Yeah. Sorry, Phil. Go ahead.
Yeah. All I was going to add, because James made a great point about framework agreements, is that ultimately most framework agreements, all they are is a commitment to price. There's no commitment to volume, which actually, you can look at it two ways. You can say, okay, great, we're on a framework. That's great. Hopefully that'll get us more business with the main contractor. But on the other hand, you can say to yourself, well, actually, all I've done is agreed a price, and there's nothing else coming. That there's no commitment to volume, which makes it really, really hard for smaller businesses to plan. And I think ultimately that situation is kind of really what engineers this very just-in-time nature that we have in the construction industry. There's a number of factors that contribute, but lack of commitment is one. When I talked about the power imbalance, it seems to me that risk is always pushed downwards and downwards and downwards until someone fails. Fails as a business is what I mean. Sorry. And I think to solve this this problem, that balance of risk needs to be adjusted.
I remember being at an event before, and someone said to me, "The projects are expensive, but they're not that expensive. They should cost more." And it was a good way of looking at it from the top up. It's just like, these £100 million projects we see, they actually probably should cost more, because it's not sustainable to have an industry operating, at the margins it does, and especially in the current environment we're in, where it's just so volatile and people are stuck into long-term contracts and material prices change week to week. That's a bigger discussion, but I want to move to yourself, Gabriel. One of the things we spoke about is just that feedback loops and transparency. And is that something you guys at Coreloops are looking into?
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things, and it kind of connects to everything we've said so far, is obviously there's a lot of unstructured data, and with each project, the small amounts of data that we do manage to capture and understand is completely lost as we go into a new project, and that's because most businesses either don't have the skill set or don't have the resource to actually analyze that data and prepare it for it to be used the next time you're estimating for a similar project. The next time you're working with similar subcontractors or a similar client. So one of the things that we're looking into, and our vision for Coreloops is, can we do that analysis on their behalf, and make sense of the data that we are capturing from different clients who do similar projects, and use that to present insights to them on future projects. So, when they bid for a project, we can flag up, hey, 9 times out of 10, you typically lose money on your dry lining packages. And these are the telltale signs that you can kind of avoid, and so on and so forth. Yeah. With that, level of insight just at the right time, they can avoid making mistakes that potentially put both the project and their company at risk.
James, do you want to add in there?
Well, actually, before I go into that, I'd just like to go back on your point about, projects should cost more. For the person that said, I would argue against that, because being on the client side, actually, I know how tight feasibilities are for clients. They're just about making these kind of business cases work. So I actually think projects can cost less, and we can deal with the wastage and the inefficiencies in the industry. That's what we've got to focus on. I don't think the answer is making projects cost more, because then just less projects will get done because the feasibilities won't work. I think it's quite an important point to make there.
Yeah. I always say it's on a webinar, it's good to have opposing arguments. I just personally feel that it's just like the sustainability of the industry. It's just, you see these contractors doing £1 billion a year with 4 million of net profit,
Yeah.
or gross profit. I'm just like, is it really worth the risk of going on roofs and working with bankers and investors just to get that sort of a return? Like, are people going to be incentivized to keep driving on with that? It's just like, it just seems like, the wastage. I agree with you on the wastage, but it just seems like operating that type of margin. It's just, you're just going to keep seeing collapse after collapse. I don't think they're over yet.
No, I agree with that. I think contractors and subcontractors should be rewarded more and get a better margin for the work they do. But we can do that by reducing inefficiencies and reducing wastage rather than increasing costs. But I know it's not an easy thing to do. Otherwise, everyone would be doing it. But it's an important point to look at it from the client's perspective as well, because I see how tight some of these business cases are to get these projects off the ground in the first place.
Yeah, completely. I guess it might go back to the transparency bit. It's just like, okay, how can we sit down at the start of the project, and reduce what you said, some of these waste? And I presume you're just not meaning material waste in general. It's just waste in resource, just anywhere you can nick off
Everything,
2%.
Yeah, I mean, going back to my analogy about the manufacturing industry or the car industry, it's very, very streamlined. Everything is, every kind of wastage is taken out of the system. Obviously, it's different with construction, because every project is bespoke to some extent. So, but we can definitely get better, because some of the stats around project delivery are pretty awful. There was a study done by Oxford University that looked at projects. To be fair, it was projects as a whole, so it was Olympic Games projects and things as well, but a lot of it was construction, which basically said that only 1 in 200 projects get finished on time, on budget, and to the benefits outlined in the original business case. So that there is huge room for improvement, without a doubt. But it has to be, and you're right as well, it has to be to make sure that the contractors, subcontractors, the whole supply chain is making a decent profit, mainly so that they can put that back into innovation and to investment, so you get this flywheel going, and the whole industry improves.
Do you know, Phil, you touched on as well the nature of the project aspect of the business. Like, for example, I was talking to subcontractors in their office for a chat a few weeks ago, literally just down the road. I know them quite well. And one of their senior site leaders, didn't have a project for 6 months, and just had these, 100 grand plus a year salary, and they have to just join another site for 6 months just to keep them on board. I'm just saying, that's 60 grand, of a loss, really, if they're just making up numbers just to keep them on board in case they won't go to another company. And I just think that's something people actually don't see enough. Is just like, you're just trying to hang on to your talent so they won't go anywhere out of boredom.
Yeah, I mean, labour resource is scarce in the industry. I think everyone knows that, and the reasons are well documented, from COVID, inflation in materials prices. Obviously, I know we agreed not to talk about politics, but you can't go without mentioning Brexit. Whatever you believe the effects are, they've had an effect, and it is a problem. We have a resourcing company within our group of companies, and they do a fantastic job. They're very close to their clients, but the situations change very, very quickly, and it's, in a sense, it's a seller's market for labour right now.
Completely. Guys, I suppose we have discussed the problems. We could keep going on. We talk about resource, culture. James, we had our opposing arguments on pricing projects, whether they're too high or too low, and just transparency around the industry and all the different things that go into the bucket. But like, we have people on the call, and I'd love for them to come away with just some best practices. So if we could just get into some best practices for the next 10 or 15 minutes, you know, it can be around client engagement, procurement best practices, you know, risk planning. I'm just going to leave it open here, and can we get stuck in and just get a few nice bites for people on the call today?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I think one of the best practices is projects tend to go wrong at the beginning, right? So, and then you're chasing sometimes for years, trying to kind of put a sticky plaster over a problem. And it usually goes wrong with the scope and the pricing, a mismatch between what the client wants and what you can afford. So those conversations and the engaging with the clients early on. And when I was sort of practicing QSing a few years ago, I'd always bring contractors in as early as possible into the conversation, because architects are very good at selling concepts to clients that they love. And then we got this strange situation where often we don't appoint the rest of the design team until somewhere further down the road, by which point the client's idea of the building or whatever project it is already sold, and then you're always fighting a losing battle. So I think the engagement's really important, and it's the engagement with the whole team as early as possible. So bringing in contractors early, bringing in specialists, because a lot of the specialist sub packages are getting more and more complicated now, and more specialists, to bring those guys in as early as possible as well. So that to me is the root of most of the issues. If you can get that right, so you've got an alignment between the budget and the expectations, then that usually solves a lot of the problems down the line. And
just even to go more into it again, James, you're saying the engagement early on, so that's a mixture of meetings, workshops, whatever needs to be done. I guess some sort of a track or recording of kind of doing the basics, like the notes, the minutes of a meeting, just all getting everything into a nice framework before anything goes into the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's recipe for disaster, isn't it? Starting on site without everyone knowing what they're doing, or having different opinions of what.
And it happens a lot.
And every single contractual conflict will be that'll be the basis of it. I thought I was doing that. Oh no, I thought I was doing that. That's what it comes down to, human nature. So the more, and you'll never get it 100%, because we are dealing, as I said, with kind of bespoke developments almost every time. But the closer you can get to everyone being aligned, the better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'd definitely echo what James has said. I mean, in a sense, at the start of the project, you know, what you've got to do is define what's known as the iron triangle. So anybody who's got any experience in project management will know that you've got this triangle of time, scope, money, that you can't really change any of the factors on without the other two kind of factors changing. Now that being the case, is totally down to expectation management. You know, as long as everyone's aware that, you know, if the scope increases, well, the money and or the time might go out, and is prepared for that, then fine. If you set an expectation just on one of those factors, it is a recipe for disaster. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Gabriel?
Yeah, I think another thing that is really good to put in place as best practices is kind of is cash flow and risk planning. Now, I haven't met one contractor who has all of their projects starting and finishing at the same point. So you will have different projects at different stages, and therefore they'll have different capital or cash requirements. And sometimes, yeah, they can put together a cash flow plan for one project, but when you've got several projects ongoing at different points, they need to plan for their cash and capital as a business. And it's typically when they don't that we hear some of the stories that we see in the headlines. And yeah, you know, today that can sometimes be difficult to do because there are things that you can't predict in the future, like massive changes of scope or mix or mistakes or rework that needs to be done. But yeah, you know, leading to our points earlier, the more data you kind of have available, the more you can kind of factor in to that cash flow / risk planning exercise. So I think, yeah, that'd be a really good thing to see contractors do more of.
And on that cash flow thing, people will actually think I'm nuts. I met a contractor last year, their FD, they had a new FD coming on board, 300 million a year, really, really nice company. And they didn't measure cash flow. They were years old. They had loads of cash in the bank, and it wasn't their KPI. And he came in, And he just said, okay, can we just concentrate on cash flow now for the next 2 years, because anything can happen here. Can we refinance any of our fleet or anything just to make sure we're not going to fall to the ground? But I'm just saying, when people say cash flow, they say, oh, sure, we all measure cash flow. But when you actually dive in a bit more, I think a lot of, again, going back to resource things, sometimes you just have a look at the numbers at the end of the week and say, okay, we're okay for another month. And I think that happens more than people think.
Yeah, countless times that, I've heard, hey, as long as we've got some money in the bank, at the end of the year, we're fine. As long as we can pay salaries at the end of the month, that means we're in the green. But as we know, that isn't necessarily true. You could just be kicking the can down the road. But yeah.
Yeah, it's just nuts. It happens at such a high level, is when a company gets to a stage and they have so much cash in the bank after years, they're just like, we're fine, nothing happens. But if you actually want to track it and put some data behind it from project by project, there's even simple things on Zero you can do, or QuickBooks.
Yeah, and just to add to that, obviously, considering how thin the margins are on some of these projects, it tends to be, as you take on bigger projects, your percentage margin decreases. So, any risk on one of your biggest projects could, push the company, 10 or 15 million in either direction, right? And that could be your entire, bank balance that you've got there, reserved, wiped out by one really, really bad project. Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Is
good
there
point
anything?
from.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that's an extremely good point. Even though all it takes is, because we're dealing with such huge volumes of money sometimes on construction projects, all it takes is one bad month or one thing to come to hit that you weren't expected, that can totally wipe that out.
Is there anything on the procurement stage we could look out for?
To me, the procurement, the way we procure contracts in the UK is a product of history. And if you were to do it from scratch again, you probably wouldn't set it up the way we've got it set up. And in fact, if you look at different countries, if you go to the US, they don't procure in the same way we do. So I think there's a lot we can learn from other countries, but one of the problems is we're kind of creatures of habit, aren't we? And we don't like to change the way we do things. This is the way we do things, and we give ourselves reasons for that's why we've got to do it. But it isn't. And you've only got to look at other industries, the way that they've changed. Like, just take, for instance, the way that you used to buy your insurance, right? So when you had to buy your car insurance, you'd have to ring around a bunch of companies and sort of compare it. And that's all been blown out of the water by the price comparison sites. So going back to sort of technology and stuff, how it's going to impact, we can either digitize the process that we've currently got, which we know is cumbersome and extremely protracted and doesn't necessarily give best value, or we can look at, well, let's build this up, let's decompose how you do it and build it up again and come up with something which is a lot faster, a lot more nimble and a lot less wasteful. That's my hope, is that we end up with a different kind of model for procurement in the future that just enables, going back to the point, that enables that collaboration early on, because actually the way we procure projects at the moment stops you from that early engagement, because you don't get the contracts on until the end, and all their fantastic expertise doesn't come on until that point. So I'm hopeful that we can change over the next few years the way that we do things.
When did that there, Phil?
Yeah, no, all I was going to say really was that, when it comes to sort of taking an initial look at projects, people do get very starry-eyed. And what I mean by that is that people say, I'm working on a £200 million project, and there's a really big headline number which everyone gets very excited about. And in a sense, it's really, really brave to say, actually, I'm not going to do this piece of work in that project because there's not enough margin in it for me. I mean, if we consider the thin operating margins that the industry does have, I think it's fairly safe to say that most projects' margin will get wiped out by inflation within 12 months, right?
Yeah.
And that's quite a sobering thought. So you have to, I think you have to not be starry-eyed about those big numbers. On the client side, about the ultimate cost of a project is going to be a big number. But for anybody working in subcontractors in the supply chain, you need not to get starry-eyed about those numbers.
Yeah, and there's some health check things you can do. You know, when an opportunity arises, feels right, you've got to put the number to one side and actually go through: is the documentation in good order? Is this a good client that I can work with? Do I know what I'm pricing? Who are the consultants on board? You know, those are the more sobering things that you need to ask yourself. And if any of those ring alarm bells, then you know that's something that you need to consider when making a decision on bidding for a project or not.
I'm conscious now of we have had some issues and problems at best practices, and really enjoyed this segment as well. I'd like to go into solutions more on the technology side of things. The industry is changing somewhat slowly. You know, there is really good technology coming onto the market. Some expensive, some not so expensive. You know, that can actually bring effective change to a company. I'd like to start that, and I'd like to keep it in a practical terms for people on the call of how we can, maybe accelerate the digital adaptation to the industry. But I'd just like to maybe some best practices here for 15 minutes on going, what can we actually do? How can we actually increase profitability by using some of these tools?
Yeah, if I can go first, I think one of them, we see this a lot with some of the companies we work with, and companies that I meet. I think one big issue is even within a company, there's a lot of fragmentation and delay to when different people in the org get the information that they need to make decisions. So I think a big change that will help contractors optimize for profitability is just increasing the transparency within their companies, making sure people have access to the right information, right data faster. So, typical sort of mid-sized business will have an accounts department, a QS, then contract managers and commercial directors. For the information about how much they've spent on a project to get to a commercial director so they can make a decision, that might take 4 or 5 weeks after the end of every month. By then, the mistake is, already too far gone. They've already overspent on that package. And who knows, maybe their profit for that month or the entire project is wiped out. So I think a real opportunity is just to increase transparency within an org. And obviously there are solutions out there that can sort of help companies do that.
Gabriel, can I just go back on something you said earlier? Just say if you're a contractor, just say your dry lining package. You said, if the solution you guys offer Coreloops, or is it another solution that you can just get that transparency? You can see every project. Okay, I know I'm going to have shortcomings here.
Yeah. So that's exactly what we do at Coreloops. So we connect accounts payable directly to a project cost report. So as soon as an invoice is processed by an accounting team, it immediately shows up in a cost report that the commercial team has access to, meaning that, rather than wait a few weeks to receive that report, they have a real-time view on what they spent today and how that compares to their budget today. So based on what has actually been done on site, does that reflect how much we've actually spent for, let's say, our dry lining package or our M&E package or our labor budget or things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Phil, James, do you want to jump in there?
Sure, yeah. So Western Analytics, we've got 3 products really, which I think can help this problem. We've talked about waste, and we have a materials waste management application called Enviro 360. We also developed during the course of last year a generative AI product called ConstructAI, which is really aimed at sort of personal productivity level, but makes use of trusted data sources elsewhere in the industry. There's much been written and said about how some of the more common AI products hallucinate, and we really take good care to make sure that doesn't happen to our products, because people are interested in facts. We're in an engineering business. We want to know how much, how big is it, when can I have it. This is all kind of fact driven and STEM driven information, and that can really help speed up the production of documentation. It can help you find customers, find out who's responsible for certain operations in a particular business. And the final thing, I guess, from our sort of tech stack that really can help is our worksite management package. We make use of facial recognition, not because we're interested in spying on people, but we just want to make sure that the right person has turned up to do the work. Yeah. So whilst time and attendance primarily is a sort of cost protection activity, I would say, if you extend that and say, okay, well, let's just say James was coming to my site to do some welding. Well, it would be nice to know at the turnstile that he had his welding ticket, right?
I would turn me away, Phil.
Yeah, I was using you as an example, James, but you get my point. It's not just about the money piece. There's a health and safety piece. There's a competency piece there as well, and all of these things and all of these pieces of information can feed into the processes that Gabriel is talking about, and there's definitely a thread that we're kind of following here, which is that that the technology can produce all sorts of good solutions. Somebody once upon a time said to me that a good process is a good process, whether it's run on paper or on a supercomputer. And I've always kind of agreed with that. The efficiencies some inefficiencies can be overcome with technology, but primarily you want to look for the right process. And I think we're in our various companies and various parts of the industry, whether it be client side, contractor side, subcontractor, we're feeling our way through this. But as James observed earlier on, a lot of the processes are based on practices that are hundreds of years old. And one of those is for example the way that the procurement is done, and it'll be a very brave organization that wants to go against that. And again, to extend sort of the analogy that James made about the motor industry, you look at the changes that have happened, say, between 1950 and now in terms of motor vehicle manufacturing. It's light years ahead. It's light years. The difference in how procurement's done, how materials are supplied, labor, products are planned. And fundamentally it goes back to the fact that almost every building in the UK is custom engineered just once, and it's never made the same way ever again. And approaches like modular buildings have attempted to try and change that, but I think we're really, as humans, we're really hung up on perhaps trying to make sure we do something slightly different than last time with the best motivation. We want it to be better, but that's not always the case. So in summary, I think there are a lot of good tech tools around there from companies like Gabriel's, like ours, and we're keen to find our own niches, but there's still a lot of work to do.
What I found, Phil, because at Construction we have most of our marketing clients are tech companies, so every day we're chatting to tech companies, and I find there's room in the industry for a middleman or middlewoman, or kind of I don't know what the official term is, but there's a gap between the construction technology companies and the contractors, and that knowledge gap is just way too big. And
it is.
And
no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I was lucky enough during the course of my career to work for MCOR. I ran the business systems team for a while, and that gap existed then and it still exists now. In a large business, that gap will be filled by business systems and analysts and similar people with similar skills who can speak to the business but also speak to the tech. A small medium-sized company won't likely 99 times out of 100 won't have that skill on board. Whereas the larger contractors, prime contractors, probably will have, because they're employing data teams and they're employing a range of staff to keep their larger scale ERP systems optimized for their processes. But again, it's a power battle, because the bigger contractors will have Oracle or SAP, and then a lot of our customers will be working with Sage, and there is a massive gap of knowledge there. You're absolutely right, Andrew. Sorry.
Yeah, I find it just so and I find I feel like people, you all are experienced in selling into contractors and kind of know the DNA. We meet so many venture-backed tech companies coming into the market, and they think you're going into an advanced, they're selling to retail, or they're selling to e-commerce or something like that. It's a completely different animal you're dealing with. And
Yeah.
I find when we talk to some of these, I'll say the word immature tech companies who've just got a load of money and want to start selling into a market, they just don't realize the sales cycle, and they don't realize that you're dealing with people who don't have a minute to spare. They see black and white, they're just, it's very practical. Does it work?
Yeah.
Does it make me money? Does it save me money? And the gap is just way too big at the moment. So I just think for a company who are looking at, bringing in these tools, create more transparency, have that dashboard of where you're losing money and where you're making money, and just, you can get it relatively cheaply. Someone can come into your business who relatively knows a bit about automation, that can come in for a month or two just to get you up and running.
They always say that, if you want to chop down more trees, at some point you've got to stop and sharpen up your axe. Yeah, and it's a truism, but it really is true. And most people who most subcontractor businesses, they're running at 99 miles an hour. There's just, as you said, Andrew, there's never enough time in the day. The things that they're concerned about are delivering their contractual commitments, paying the people they've got. Almost nothing else is even worth their time thinking about, which is why you get that gap. So unless there's some kind of industry standard for processes that tech solutions can be developed about, those tech companies, VC-backed tech companies, are going to struggle, because, as you say, the sales cycles will be long. The customers won't give them enough time. We have to work very hard at it with our customers. We have to really work hard at it. We have to stay close to them, understand what their problems are, and hopefully we'll give them a solution to their issues. But getting to a point, where you've actually done your proposal and the solution's on the table, actually, then you've got the problem of change management. So someone senior in the business will say, yeah, we'll have that, and here's the budget, and go ahead and do it. And then you've got the same problem with the people on the operational side, certainly, who are really only concerned with delivering what the commitments that their company has made, and quite rightly. So it's a problem that has to be solved. I mean, the other side of that comment that you made, Andrew, really is about the fact that construction is one of the least digitized industries, not just in the UK, but worldwide. And that for VC-backed tech companies is a massive come and get me flag. That's why you see these companies struggling, and with that gap. We're lucky enough to have on our software development team, between them, they've got 30 to 40 years experience of dealing with people in the construction and rail industries. We believe that our domain knowledge, is really important to us and to our customers, because it means we can understand some of their trials and tribulations and deliver solutions to their problems. And that's one of the reasons we've developed the products that we have.
Yeah, and just, I want to dwell on too much from my side, but when I just said there, like, the hiring someone just to come in and help you with these systems, just get them on board. We've done that at a smaller scale. I think it cost me like $3,000 to just come in.
Yeah,
came in a couple of days a week for a month, and just got our systems up in place for our media dashboard, our newsletter subscribers. So you've one place, okay, this isn't working here, and we just have one dashboard to say, okay, we're going to stop doing these articles because they're not really working. We need to do more of these. From an advertising point of view as well, it's like, this type of client is not going to work for us because it's hard to buy whatever materials online or something like that. But
all I was going to say, Adrian, is Andrew, sorry, is that we offer professional services to our customers to help them through some of that change management piece. But I think I could probably count on one hand, the number of clients that I've met with that actually have that skill in-house. You know, you could argue that we've got a vested interest in doing it, and that's why we do it. But on the other hand, if you've got a trusted third party, as you had in your case, you know, ultimately the customer's going to get a better result.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's someone who's good with IT can just basically get this up and running from an initial stage. It just gets a bit of momentum into it. What do you think, James?
Yeah. Also, I was going to say you know, we've talked a lot about project management, and when I was doing my project management training, there was only two types of people in the room: software people and construction people.
That's interesting.
And we both, you know, use different types of different types of approaches, but fundamentally, you know, software people and construction people are the Gantt chart experts. You know, we ought to be able to do this. We ought to be able to get those two things together to make it work.
And they're still the projects are always late.
Indeed. Yeah, indeed.
Room for improvement.
What would you say, James? And just this discussion, it's just that implementation piece. Just say people viewing this, they're gradually implementing technology into the business, and just to make that overlap a bit easier.
Yeah, I mean, Phil raises a good point. So the barrier to entries, as I said at the beginning, is getting lower and lower in terms of tech, and there's certainly not a shortage of solutions out there. If anyone went to sort of Digital Construction Week, whenever it was May, I mean, you got the whole of London Excel fitted out with these small and big companies. So every single process you can possibly think of in construction, there is a digital solution out there. The problem is, as Phil rightly said, is it's just overwhelming, and there is so much out there that a lot of people just don't know where to start. And even if you do implement it, then getting people to, and this is the key word, is adoption, is very, very difficult, because number one, we're creatures of habit. Nobody likes change. Number two, a lot of the people are running around with their hair on fire trying to, so even if they got the intention to adopt a new solution, it's always, well, I'll do that tomorrow when this issue is solved. So then you have to go with the stick approach, which is it comes from above, and that's never the best way. You always want it to be like mandated from the top, but really encouraged from the bottom. So I think the encouragement I can see, looking at a positive perspective, is this kind of translator mode between the tech and the domain, whether that's construction or software, doesn't really matter. I think we'll slowly start getting filled by two things. Number one, this very digital literate cohort coming through schools and universities who just get all this because it's what they're used to. And secondly, the rise of artificial intelligence, which is going to take away a lot of the guesswork for people. They'll be able to input with these systems a lot easier. They don't need coding experience and what have you. And, you know, all these issues, even though I'm on the consultant side, I can kind of understand some of the issues Phil was talking about, because what we do at Gleeds is, you know, we're not software developers, but we partner with third parties where we need to, and then we do develop in-house stuff where we need to. So one of the big things we do, obviously, as a quantity surveyor, is lots of cost planning and lots of feasibility estimates. So what we've spent the last few years doing is making sure that our data is in order, getting that in order, and then building an interface on top of it, which is so easy to use, you know, so that we can help rise that adoption. But that's not all. You've got to also win the hearts and minds. You've got to go around, you've got to show people, you've almost got to sit down and hold people's hand through it, because and it's not just our industry, people just hate change, right? They just hate it.
James, do you guys have influence on your supply chain on what technology to use?
To some degree. I mean, it depends. Sometimes it will be dictated to us from the client, and sometimes a contractor will have a certain way of doing things, for instance. But we do have influence in terms of the tender documents. Sometimes we can prescribe what system, if you like, should be used for that particular project, and we can dictate the tech stack. There are some projects where we're also appointed as information manager. So, you know, then that whole kind of responsibility becomes even more towards us, if you like. But there's no sort of one size fits all, if you like, Andrew.
Yeah, it's you know, it's funny that in taking our point, Phil, the construction industry is way behind. I think it's just above agriculture when it comes to digital adoption.
Yeah.
Which is probably nothing to shout too loud about. Although agriculture is starting to make moves, But
Definitely.
one area we see is the fit out market is a lot more savvy than your traditional contractor. And we just, from our data as well, just on construction, we're able to see data on what articles work well. Technology and fit out work quite well. And it's kind of just an estimated guess, but we feel that because the fit out market, the clients are really savvy. So if you're doing a fit out for like Zara or the holding company, they want good access to information and they're going to pass that down along. And you also usually have a younger demographic in fit out as well. And it's just a smaller team. We go in for 3 or 4 months, bang this project out, and we're going to use as much technology as possible. So we keep this tight. Do you guys find that? Gabriel, you work with fit out actually.
Yeah, I definitely think fit out companies, yes, are more likely to fit into that demographic. I think they're more likely to be involved in the design phase and therefore have that better client engagement at the start of the project. So therefore have more data about what they're committing to do. And because they are at the final stage of the project, they are also implementing technology into the business, access control, screens, stuff like that. So yeah, definitely more so. And last but not least, it's obviously incredibly important for them because their projects are so short to stay on top of profitability. Because once you've left site, it's very hard to go back and say, oh, we forgot to charge you for this, or yeah, we didn't quite make as much as we planned on this. So really important for those short projects to have the right tech in place so that they don't leave the project and realize that they haven't sort of picked up all of the pieces.
Yeah, and I think they're far more data driven from my experience. You deal with, say, schools, for instance, you're dealing with 1 or 2 metrics. These fit out companies, they really delve into the metrics and into it. So it's all very data driven, which is a fantastic step in the right direction. That's what every client should be doing, really.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know what your experience has been, but I find that fit out companies actually make the most margin
Yeah.
on of any sort of subcontractor, specialist contractor on projects. So that might be closely related.
I think so.
Yeah.
Guys, we're just in the last 5 minutes now. I really enjoyed hosting this. I just want people to go away from this event, just 1 or 2 things they can take into their own business. A couple of bullet points. I'm going to start with you, James. From the problems we discussed and some of the solutions, if someone's just going to get started today, what are the initial steps?
So, I mean, we haven't talked about it too much, but I'm going to talk about the huge opportunity we have with generative AI. I mean, Phil's got fantastic products that people can look up, but even just your chat GPTs and your large language models out there, I think people are underestimating what that can do for your day-to-day job and getting yourself conversant in how to work with AI is really important, not just for your career, but for your life in general. But it will really, really impact your career. And it's a truism that people say it won't be artificial intelligence that takes your job. It'll be the person that knows how to use artificial intelligence. So if there's one thing I'd like people to take away from this is be incredibly excited about what's happening now, because for first time in at least a generation, we've got the opportunity for our industry to really harness the technology to improve some of those terrible stats I talked about earlier. So get stuck in, experiment, don't be shy, play around with it and learn how to use it.
Phil?
Yeah, I think my advice would really be to do your own research, find out about the new this new generation of technologies, which some people have called the next industrial revolution. Find out about those. Don't be afraid of that. There's nothing wrong with actually not being able to understand the technology here, but you do need to engage with partners who do, and I think this is a fundamental part of business today. Is just looking for where you can actually get technology advantages. Companies like Coreloops and like us, we developed some great solutions. It would be a real shame if they just sat on the shelf and got dusty because everybody else was just too busy to get engaged. The adoption problem that James mentioned is real, not just in construction. As he said, people don't like change, but you've got to be brave enough to change and keep revisiting that change, keep challenging yourselves internally, to improve things and try and steer away from the just doing things the way they've always been done because that's the way we do it. That's an absolute killer.
Gabriel.
Yeah, I think my 2 cents would just be first and foremost to acknowledge the problem. I think probably just because of how construction is set up, everyone wants to sort of act like they've got everything in order and they're the best contractor in the world. But in essence, they do know that behind closed doors things are not in order. So I think the first thing is to acknowledge the problem, and then obviously you can start to actively look for solutions, and find a technology provider that is a right fit for your type of org, right? I've met countless companies who have been burnt by some of the bigger technology providers, locked into 2, 3, 5 year contracts for software that they just can't use because it wasn't set up correctly, or you don't have, or they don't have the right software.
Now, thanks for that, guys. I'd like to add one last thing as well for people getting initially started, just from a media's perspective, is look into that. Everyone knows a good person for IT or a good software person. My advice from us as a media company as well, who operate in construction, is to talk to someone who's really into this, who's passionate about it. We reduced a day a week of admin time just on our newsletter articles. So we do a newsletter every evening for the next morning. It was taking ages, and I just knew a friend who loved it, who loved like automation, and just got us started. And now we've diminished 8 hours a week, which is a lot of time. That's a lot of time that our journalists now can be doing interviews with people and working on higher level stuff. And it's just all from just giving that person a shout to say, what the hell do I do here? Like, I just want to get this problem out of my way. And I think that's a good little entry point, is just to get the small little problem, get some momentum into your systems, and take it from there.
Yeah, 100%.
Everyone, thanks for today's webinar. I really enjoyed it. For all registrants, you'll be sent this webinar shortly. Gabriel as well, this will be on your site and part of your email newsletter in the coming weeks. And we'll release it across Construction Wave on our newsletter. So I just want to thank everyone again for coming on, and yeah, we might be following up with you soon and sending out this again. And thanks again for your time, and take care, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you, James.